In the heart of Renaissance Italy, where the Medici family wove an intricate tapestry of power and art, life moved with a dangerous rhythm. Beneath the gilded ceilings of palazzi and within the bustling markets, honor was not merely a concept, but a living, breathing force, often defended with cold steel. A whisper, a glance, a perceived slight could ignite a blaze of fury, leading men to face death in the name of pride. For centuries, across sun-drenched vineyards and shadowed cobblestone alleys, blades often settled scores that legal parchment could not. These are the narratives of 8 such encounters, raw and unvarnished, from an age when a man's reputation was his very breath and a duel was the ultimate arbiter. Number 8. The Shadow of the Ponte Vecchio. The year was 1478. Florence, under the guiding, often manipulative, hand of Lorenzo de' Medici, was a crucible of ambition and artistic genius. Yet, beneath its polished surface, grudges simmered, particularly among the noble houses, whose ancient lineage often clashed with the rising power of the merchant princes. Count Silvio di Castiglione, a man whose family roots plunged deep into the Tuscan soil, carried himself with an air of inherited authority. His beard was neatly trimmed, his gaze unwavering, and his reputation for fierce loyalty to his own bloodline was well known across the Arno Valley. His younger sister, Isabella, recently betrothed to a respected, though somewhat aging, Pisan dignitary, was his greatest pride. The whispers that reached his ears about Gianluca Vespucci, however, threatened to unravel that pride. Gianluca Vespucci was a different kind of Florentine noble. His family, though prominent in trade and finance, lacked the ancient military renown of the Castigliones. Gianluca himself was known for his sharp wit, his extravagant dress, and a certain disdain for established social niceties. He frequented the taverns and public squares, often accompanied by a boisterous retinue of young men who admired his daring. It was in one such public square, near the bustling stalls of the Ponte Vecchio, that Gianluca Vespucci committed the offense. Isabella di Castiglione, accompanied by her duenna, was purchasing silks for her trousseau. Gianluca, seeing her, made a comment, loud enough to be heard by passers-by, about her beauty being wasted on an old man, and perhaps added a crude joke about the quality of her future husband's estate. The duenna, shocked, quickly ushered Isabella away, her face burning with shame. The word of the insult reached Silvio di Castiglione by nightfall. Silvio's immediate reaction was a cold, hard anger. He did not shout or rage. He simply called for his closest confidant, Riccardo da Montefeltro, a retired mercenary captain, who now managed Silvio's estates. Riccardo, a man of few words and keen observation, listened as Silvio recounted the tale, his voice steady but his grip on the armrest of his chair white-knuckled. "This cannot stand," Silvio stated, his voice flat. "My sister's honor, my family's name, has been defiled by a common jester." Riccardo nodded slowly. He understood the unspoken code. A public insult of this magnitude, particularly against a woman of noble birth and already betrothed, could not be met with mere words or even a formal complaint to the Auto di Guardia, the city's watchman. It required a physical redress, a visible demonstration of the Castiglione family's resolve. The next morning, Riccardo, acting as Silvio's second, delivered the challenge to Gianluca Vespucci's palazzo. Gianluca, lounging in his courtyard and still basking in the perceived cleverness of his public jibe, was initially amused. He scoffed, asking Riccardo if the old count was too feeble to deliver his own threats. Riccardo simply stated the terms: a duel at dawn, 2 days hence, in the secluded olive grove bordering the Castiglione lands, just beyond the Porta Romana. The weapons would be rapiers and daggers, chosen for their speed and precision, fitting for a duel of honor. Gianluca, though a braggart, was not a coward. The challenge, delivered so formally, struck him with a sudden sobering clarity. This was not a jest. This was serious. He accepted, appointing his cousin, Marco Vespucci, as his second. The 2 days leading up to the duel were a tense silence. Silvio spent his time practicing with his rapier in his private courtyard, the rhythmic clang of steel against steel echoing through the villa. He was not a young man, but his fencing master, Giovanni Battista, had drilled him relentlessly since boyhood. His movements were precise, his parries solid, his thrusts economical. He reviewed techniques, focusing on defensive maneuvers and swift counterattacks. He ate little, slept fitfully, his mind consumed by the impending confrontation. His thoughts were not of fear, but of the weight of his family's name, the stain he had to expunge. Historical records from the Castiglione family archives, later compiled by the historian Bartolomeo Scala, reveal Silvio's meticulous preparation and his solemn commitment to the duel. Gianluca, on the other hand, spent the initial hours in a state of bravado, drinking heavily with his friends, boasting of how he would teach the old count a lesson. Yet, as the hours dwindled, a cold dread began to settle in. He too had received training, though perhaps not with the same rigorous discipline as Silvio. His style was flashier, more aggressive, relying on speed and youthful agility. He had won several minor skirmishes in taverns and back alleys, but this was different. This was a formal duel, with lives at stake, and the opponent was a man of proven skill and unwavering purpose. And Marco, his second, tried to steady his nerves, advising caution and suggesting he focus on dodging Silvio's precise thrusts before launching his own flamboyant attacks. The chronicles of a lesser-known Florentine diarist, Benedetto Dei, mention Gianluca's growing apprehension in the days leading up to the event. The dawn of the appointed day arrived shrouded in a light mist that clung to the olive trees, muffling the sounds of the waking city. The chosen spot was a small, relatively flat clearing, far enough from the main roads to ensure privacy but close enough to be reached without undue travel. Silvio di Castiglione arrived first, dressed in simple dark clothing that offered no impediment to movement, his rapier gleaming at his side. Riccardo da Montefeltro stood silently behind him, carrying a small leather bag containing bandages and a flask of water. Silvio's face was grim, unreadable. Shortly thereafter, Gianluca Vespucci arrived, accompanied by Marco. Gianluca wore a more elaborate suit, though still practical for combat, a stark contrast to Silvio's somber attire. He looked pale beneath the mist, his usual swagger diminished. His rapier, a highly decorated piece, seemed almost too heavy in his hand. Marco carried a similar bag to Riccardo's. The seconds, following the established protocol, approached each other in the center of the clearing. They exchanged brief, formal words, confirming the terms of the duel and ensuring that no hidden weapons or armor were present. They then marked the boundaries of the fighting area, a rough circle in the dew-soaked grass. Silvio and Gianluca took their positions, facing each other across the 20 paces. The mist swirled around them, making the air feel heavy, still. The silence was profound, broken only by the chirping of unseen birds and the soft rustle of leaves as a gentle breeze stirred the ancient trees. Neither man spoke. There were no grand declarations, no taunts. This was a matter of honor, solemn and deadly. Both men drew their rapiers. The metallic whisper of steel, leaving its scabbard, cut through the quiet. They held their daggers in their offhands, ready for parrying or a desperate close-quarters thrust. Riccardo gave the signal. A short, sharp nod. The duel began. Silvio moved first, not with a sudden lunge, but with a controlled, measured advance. He held his rapier steady, probing, assessing Gianluca's stance. Gianluca, perhaps out of nervousness or a desire to assert dominance, lunged forward with a series of quick, aggressive thrusts. His blade flashed, aiming for Silvio's chest, then his shoulder. Silvio, a master of defense, parried each attack with a precise flick of his wrist, deflecting the blows with minimal effort. He used his dagger expertly, catching one of Gianluca's wilder thrusts on its guard, sending a jarring vibration up Gianluca's arm. Gianluca's initial flurry began to falter. He was expending too much energy, his breathing becoming ragged. Silvio, conserving his strength, watched for an opening. He circled, forcing Gianluca to pivot, to adjust his footing. The ground was slick, with dew, making precise movements treacherous. Silvio's rapier moved like a serpent, feinting high, then low, testing Gianluca's guard. Gianluca, growing increasingly frustrated by Silvio's impenetrable defense, made a mistake. He overextended on a lunge, trying to reach Silvio's heart, his balance momentarily compromised. It was the opening Silvio had waited for. In a fluid, devastating motion, Silvio's rapier darted forward. It was not a grand thrust, but a clean, precise strike. The point slipped past Gianluca's guard, finding its mark just beneath his left rib. Gianluca gasped, a raw, choked sound. His eyes widened in disbelief and pain. He stumbled back, dropping his dagger. His rapier clattered to the ground. A moment later, as he clutched his side, a dark stain began to spread across the elegant fabric of his tunic. He tried to speak, but only a gurgle escaped his lips. His knees buckled, and he slowly sank to the wet ground. Silvio stood over him, his rapier still extended, its tip now stained crimson. His face remained emotionless, but his chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. Riccardo was immediately at his side, taking the rapier from him and wiping the blade clean with a cloth. Marco rushed to Gianluca's side, calling his name, but it was too late. Gianluca's eyes glazed over, and he lay still. The mist seemed to thicken around them, lending a spectral quality to the scene. Riccardo and Marco, though on opposing sides, followed the grim custom. They knelt beside Gianluca. There was no argument, no accusation. The duel had been fair, the outcome conclusive. Marco, tears silently tracing paths down his face, closed his cousin's eyes. He then looked up at Silvio, a silent acknowledgement of the deed done. Silvio, his duty fulfilled, simply nodded. There was no triumph in his posture, only a weary resignation. He had defended his family's honor, but at the cost of a life. The seconds quietly lifted Gianluca's body and carried him away, back towards Florence, to begin the somber preparations for burial. Silvio, his face still etched with the aftermath of the struggle, turned and walked slowly back towards his estate, the dew soaking his boots. The sun, now rising above the horizon, began to burn away the mist, revealing the peaceful olive grove, which had just witnessed a brutal act of retribution. The Castiglione family honor had been avenged. The incident, though hushed among the wider Florentine populace, was recorded in the private ledgers of the Medici household, noting the death of Gianluca Vespucci and the swift, unchallenged return of Count Silvio di Castiglione to his daily affairs, his reputation burnished by blood. The Chronicle of Niccolò Machiavelli, though focusing on broader political currents, makes a brief but pointed mention of the prevailing custom of duels to settle such grave matters of honor within the Florentine nobility during this period. The event served as a stark reminder that even in an age of dazzling cultural growth, the ancient codes of chivalry and vengeance still held sway over life and death. Number 7. The Alchemist's Grudge. The year was 1520, and the air in Florence still hummed with the echoes of artistic and intellectual ferment, even as political stability sometimes wavered. Pope Leo X, born Giovanni de' Medici, presided over the church from Rome, yet the influence of his family extended throughout Tuscany. This era also saw the rise of natural philosophy, bordering on alchemy, a pursuit that captivated many curious minds, including those of ambitious scholars and charlatans alike. Messer Benedetto Rossi, a scholar with a keen intellect and a volatile temper, believed himself on the verge of a revolutionary discovery, a universal solvent, capable of dissolving any substance. He was a protege of sorts to a minor Medici relative, who had provided him with a small, well-equipped laboratory near the university. Benedetto's rival was Dr. Ulrico Lombardi, an older, more established alchemist who scoffed at Benedetto's flamboyant claims. Ulrico was known for his cautious, methodical approach, his laboratory filled with meticulously catalogued herbs, minerals, and ancient texts. He had spent decades patiently pursuing the elusive philosopher's stone, and viewed Benedetto's theories as reckless folly, potentially dangerous to the patronage of the Medici, who he felt should invest in proven, not speculative research. Their rivalry was not secret. It was a simmering undercurrent in the intellectual circles of Florence. The spark that ignited their conflict came during a demonstration hosted by a Florentine guild of apothecaries keen to assess new alchemical processes that might improve the quality of their medicines. Benedetto, eager to impress potential patrons, presented a small vial containing a clear liquid, claiming it was his newly discovered universal solvent. He dramatically poured a drop onto a small piece of lead, expecting it to dissolve immediately. However, the lead remained stubbornly intact, only developing a slight, tarnished sheen. A murmur rippled through the assembled crowd. Ulrico, standing at the back, seized the moment. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the whispers, and declared, "Messer Rossi, it appears your universal solvent is merely vinegar, poorly diluted. A child could achieve a more potent effect." He then held up a small dark rock, claiming it was a rare mineral from the Apennines. "This, Messer Rossi," Ulrico continued, his eyes glittering with malice, "will dissolve your solvent more thoroughly than your liquid would dissolve lead." The assembled apothecaries chuckled, some openly. Benedetto's face, usually animated, turned a deep crimson. The public humiliation, the direct challenge to his intellectual credibility, was intolerable. He had spent years on his theories, and Ulrico had just dismissed them as childish folly. Benedetto, trembling with a mixture of rage and shame, advanced on Ulrico. "Dr. Lombardi," he hissed, his voice barely audible, "you question not only my work, but my honor. Such words demand satisfaction." Ulrico, sensing the dangerous turn, merely raised an eyebrow. "Satisfaction from a man who cannot even dissolve a piece of lead. What can you offer Messer Rossi but further failures?" This cutting remark was the final straw. Benedetto threw a small heavy inkwell he had been holding, narrowly missing Ulrico's head. The inkwell shattered against the wall behind him. The guild members quickly intervened, separating the two men before blows could be exchanged. Later that evening, Benedetto's second, a disillusioned student named Tommaso, who admired Benedetto's intellect despite his eccentricities, delivered the formal challenge to Ulrico's residence. The terms were specific: a duel with longswords, chosen for their directness, and the skill required to wield them at dawn in 3 days. The location was to be a secluded clearing within the Medici gardens, a spot used occasionally by the family for private hunting, ensuring discretion. Ulrico, though older, had once been a skilled fencer in his youth, and he accepted the challenge with a weary sigh. He knew Benedetto's volatile nature, but he also knew his own reputation had been publicly questioned. To refuse would be to admit cowardice, a far greater insult than any public jibe. The challenge, recorded in a private diary kept by a Medici chamberlain, indicates the severity of the insult and the perceived necessity of the duel. The next 3 days were consumed by preparation. Benedetto, consumed by a burning desire for vindication, trained relentlessly. He was not a natural swordsman, but his youthful energy and furious determination gave him a raw power. His student, Tommaso, a quiet man, but surprisingly adept with a blade, acted as his training partner, patiently guiding him through parries and thrusts. Benedetto focused on overwhelming his opponent with speed and aggression, hoping to exploit Ulrico's age. He reviewed old fencing manuals, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. The chronicles of Alessandro de Pazzi, a contemporary, highlight Benedetto's intense, almost obsessive focus on the duel. Ulrico, on the other hand, approached the duel with a more philosophical detachment. He was not afraid of death, having faced illness and intellectual defeat before, but he wished to defend his reputation. He dusted off his old fencing master's lessons, practicing in his private courtyard with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He was not as quick as he once was, but his technique was impeccable, his movements precise and economical. He focused on defense, on wearing down his opponent, on exploiting any opening that Benedetto's youthful impulsiveness might create. He knew Benedetto was quicker, but he also knew Benedetto was prone to making mistakes under pressure. And Ulrico's approach was documented in letters exchanged with his cousin, a physician in Venice, expressing his pragmatic view of the impending confrontation. The morning of the duel was clear and cool, a typical Florentine spring day. The sun had just begun to peek over the cypress trees as the two men arrived at the secluded clearing. Benedetto, dressed in practical, dark clothing, looked tense, his eyes bright with a mixture of anger and anticipation. Tommaso, his second, stood quietly behind him, his face somber. Ulrico, dressed in a simple light tunic, appeared calm, almost serene. His second, an elderly, stoic groundskeeper who had known Ulrico for decades, carried the necessary supplies. The air was still, save for the chirping of cicadas. The seconds, both men of honor, performed the rituals. They measured the swords, checked for hidden protections, and marked the boundaries of the fighting circle. There were no witnesses beyond the four men, ensuring the privacy required for such a sensitive affair within the Medici domains. Benedetto and Ulrico took their positions. They stood silently for a moment, two figures caught between ancient codes and nascent scientific inquiry. Both men drew their longswords. The sound of steel, scraping from leather, echoed in the silent glade. Tommaso gave the signal, a quiet clearing of his throat. Benedetto, consumed by his fury, lunged forward with a furious series of attacks. His sword flashed, aiming for Ulrico's head, then his chest, then his legs, a whirlwind of steel. He pressed his advantage, hoping to overwhelm the older man. Ulrico, however, was a master of defensive play. He parried each blow with a deliberate, almost graceful movement, deflecting Benedetto's attacks with the flat of his blade, guiding them away from his body. He retreated slowly, carefully, maintaining his guard, forcing Benedetto to chase him, expending his energy. Benedetto's initial fury began to subside, replaced by a growing frustration. He was sweating heavily, his breathing ragged. Ulrico, though moving slower, seemed unaffected, his parry still precise, his eyes never leaving Benedetto's blade. Benedetto attempted a complex maneuver, a feint followed by a disengage and a thrust, a move he had practiced repeatedly with Tommaso. But his execution was flawed, his foot slipped slightly on the dew-kissed grass. It was a momentary lapse in concentration, a fraction of a second. Ulrico saw it. His eyes, though old, were still sharp. He parried Benedetto's errant thrust with a swift, powerful deflection, sending Benedetto's blade wide. In the same motion, Ulrico's longsword, once so patiently defensive, transformed into a weapon of attack. He advanced one step, a deliberate, economical movement and thrust. The blade slid true, finding its mark in Benedetto's right shoulder, just beneath the collarbone. Benedetto cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound of pain and surprise. His sword fell from his grasp, clattering loudly against the ground. Ulrico immediately withdrew his blade. He did not press his advantage. He stepped back, lowering his sword, his face now etched with a look of regret. Benedetto, his arm useless, stumbled backwards, clutching his wounded shoulder. Blood welled from the wound, staining his tunic a dark, viscous red. Tommaso was instantly at his side, tearing strips of cloth from Benedetto's own garment to staunch the flow. The wound, though painful and disabling, was not immediately fatal. Ulrico watched, his expression somber. After a moment of silence, Ulrico turned to Tommaso. "He lives," Ulrico stated, his voice calm. "The honor has been met. Let him heal." Tommaso nodded, acknowledging the mercy shown. Ulrico then turned and walked away, his second following him, leaving Benedetto and Tommaso in the silent glade. The sun, now higher, filtered through the olive trees, illuminating the bloodied ground. The scientific debate had been settled not by logic or experiment, but by the clash of steel. Benedetto Rossi survived, though his wound was deep, and his reputation as a duelist, unlike his alchemical theories, had been definitively debunked. He later retired from public intellectual life, focusing on less ambitious, more practical chemical experiments. The Florentine archives, containing notes from the Guild of Apothecaries, confirm Benedetto's subsequent retreat from public demonstrations and Ulrico's continued, albeit solitary, pursuit of his own alchemical endeavors. This duel, though small in its immediate impact on the city, became a whispered cautionary tale among scholars, a reminder that intellect alone did not guarantee respect, and some disputes demanded more than words. Number 6. The Architect's Vengeance. The year was 1555. Cosimo, the first de' Medici, ruled Florence and Tuscany with an iron fist, transforming the city into a true ducal capital. His ambitious building projects were reshaping the landscape, creating new palaces, fortifications, and public spaces. This era bred fierce competition among artists and architects, vying for ducal patronage. Among these was Maestro Leonardo Borromeo, a brilliant but arrogant architect, whose designs for the Palazzo Pitti's new wings had won him favor with Cosimo. Leonardo was renowned for his innovative use of space and light, but also for his cutting remarks about his rivals. His most persistent rival was Messer Giorgio Vasari, himself a renowned artist, architect, and chronicler of the arts. Vasari, while respected, felt that Leonardo often dismissed his contributions and unfairly criticized his designs. Their animosity was a long-standing fixture in the artistic circles of Florence, a quiet tension that often flared into public snipes. Vasari, meticulous and diligent, had numerous influential friends at court, but Leonardo's direct line to Cosimo often gave him the upper hand. The breaking point arrived during a review of plans for a new Medici villa outside Florence. Cosimo had gathered his favorite architects and advisors, including both Leonardo and Vasari. Leonardo presented his grand designs, filled with soaring arches and intricate stonework. When it was Vasari's turn to comment, he offered several minor but insightful criticisms, suggesting alternative structural supports that would ensure greater stability, perhaps subtly implying Leonardo's designs were more about flash than function. Leonardo, infuriated by the critique, especially in front of Cosimo, retorted with a scathing public dismissal. "Messer Vasari," Leonardo sneered, his voice dripping with contempt, "your criticisms are as ill-formed as your perspective drawings. Perhaps you should stick to painting small portraits, for your eye clearly cannot comprehend true architectural grandeur. Your proposals are fit only for a chicken coop, not a ducal residence." The insult was particularly pointed, attacking not only Vasari's architectural skill, but also his respected painting ability. A hush fell over the room. Vasari, a usually composed man, visibly paled, then flushed a deep red. His work, his very reputation, had been publicly ridiculed by a man he considered a rival and an upstart, and in front of the Duke no less. Vasari stood stiffly, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Mastro Borromeo," he said, his voice low and trembling with suppressed rage, "you question my craft, my eye, and my honor. You will answer for these words, not with drawings, but with steel." Cosimo, though often entertained by such rivalries, frowned at the direct challenge to a duel within his presence. He swiftly dismissed the meeting, knowing the code of honor now demanded a bloody resolution. This confrontation is recounted in detail in the anonymous Florentine manuscript known as the Cronache di Corte, a collection of court gossip and significant events. Within hours, Vasari's second, a younger sculptor named Baccio, delivered the challenge to Leonardo. The terms were specific: a duel with broadswords, a heavy, devastating weapon, a choice that hinted at Vasari's desire for a decisive, brutal end to the dispute. The location was to be a secluded clearing in the Cassini Park, a vast ducal hunting ground outside the city walls, at sunrise in 2 days. Leonardo, though arrogant, was not a stranger to the sword. All noble-born men of the era received military training. He accepted, appointing as foreman a burly, taciturn man named Pietro as his second. The formal acceptance of the challenge is noted in the records of the city's provost marshal, though the duel itself was to be unofficial. The 2 days that followed were a testament to their differing characters. Leonardo, confident in his inherent superiority, practiced sparingly. He was a strong man, broad-shouldered, and accustomed to physical labor on construction sites. He believed his natural strength and reach with the broadsword would quickly overcome Vasari, whom he considered more of a scholar than a warrior. He reviewed basic broadsword drills, confident that his raw power would prevail. His thoughts were consumed more by the next ducal commission than by the impending duel. Private letters from Leonardo to his mistress, discovered much later in a forgotten chest, reveal his dismissive attitude towards the gravity of the duel. Vasari, on the other hand, spent every waking hour in intense preparation. He was older than Leonardo, and though he had received military training in his youth, he knew he was not as strong as his opponent. He sought out an old fencing master, a retired soldier named Rosso, known for his pragmatic and efficient style with the broadsword. Vasari focused on technique, on parrying with precision, on finding openings rather than forcing them. He studied his opponent's potential weaknesses, analyzing Leonardo's likely reliance on brute force. He knew this duel was not just about his life, but about his entire legacy. Accounts from Vasari's own students, later compiled by his biographers, emphasize his meticulous preparation and his determination to prove his worth beyond his artistic talents. The dawn of the appointed day broke with a cold, piercing light. The Cascine Park, usually bustling with hunters and courtiers later in the day, was silent, save for the rustling of leaves and the distant cry of a hawk. The chosen clearing was wide and open, offering no cover, just a vast expanse of dew-soaked grass. Leonardo arrived first, dressed in heavy, practical clothing, his broadsword belted at his side. Pietro, his second, stood silently beside him, his face as impassive as stone. Leonardo looked relaxed, almost bored. Soon after, Vasari arrived, accompanied by Baccio. Vasari wore a lighter tunic, allowing for greater freedom of movement, his broadsword looking almost too large for his frame. His face was grim, his eyes tired from lack of sleep, but there was a fierce determination in their depths. Baccio, younger and more agitated, kept glancing nervously between the two combatants. The seconds performed their solemn duty, confirming the terms, checking for hidden armor, and marking the dueling ground. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the unspoken tension. Leonardo and Vasari took their positions, facing each other across the 20 paces. The broadswords resting on their shoulders looked heavy, almost brutal. There were no words exchanged, no last-minute appeals. This was a private affair, settled between two men and their blades. Baccio gave the signal, a short, sharp cough. The duel began. Leonardo, true to Vasari's prediction, attacked immediately with a furious, powerful swing of his broadsword aiming for Vasari's head. It was a blow meant to end the fight quickly, relying on sheer force. Vasari, however, was ready. He parried the blow with a precise, almost elegant movement, deflecting the heavy blade with the flat of his own sword, guiding it wide. The force of the blow still jarred his arm, but his defense held. He then moved quickly a step to the side, forcing Leonardo to adjust his weight, to overextend slightly. Leonardo, surprised by Vasari's unexpected agility, recovered quickly and launched another series of powerful sweeping attacks, aiming for Vasari's legs, then his chest. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of steel and muscle. Vasari, however, remained disciplined. He continued to parry, to deflect, to move, giving ground slowly but always keeping his guard up. He did not attempt any offensive moves in the initial flurry, focusing solely on exhausting Leonardo, on frustrating his powerful attacks. He knew his strength could not match Leonardo's in a prolonged slugging match. As the minutes dragged on, Leonardo's attacks, though still powerful, began to lose some of their initial ferocity. His breathing became heavier, his movements less precise. Vasari, though tired, remained steady, his parries still clean and effective. He watched Leonardo's eyes, waiting for the telltale signs of fatigue. Leonardo, growing increasingly frustrated by Vasari's unyielding defense, made a desperate lunge, a wide, sweeping blow designed to end the stalemate. His balance was compromised, his guard momentarily open. It was the opening Vasari had been waiting for. In a swift, fluid motion, Vasari dropped his own guard slightly, inviting the attack, then parried Leonardo's sweeping blow with a strong upward deflection. As Leonardo's heavy blade soared past him, Vasari spun on his heel, thrusting his own broadsword forward in a quick, economical lunge. The heavy point found its mark, piercing Leonardo's left side, just below the ribs. Leonardo cried out, a strangled gasp of pain and surprise. His broadsword clattered to the ground, its heavy weight dragging him down. He stumbled back, clutching his side, his face contorted in agony. Vasari immediately withdrew his blade, stepping back, his chest heaving, his face pale, but his eyes alight with a grim satisfaction. Pietro, Leonardo's second, rushed to his master's side, trying to staunch the gushing blood. Baccio Vasari's second watched silently, his face a mixture of relief and somber reflection. Leonardo, though still alive, was bleeding profusely. His strength, once his greatest asset, was now draining rapidly from his body. Pietro looked up at Vasari, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and respect. "He is badly wounded, Maestro Vasari," he stammered. "He needs a surgeon quickly." Vasari, his voice hoarse, simply nodded. "Take him, then. The satisfaction has been met." He turned and walked slowly away, his broadsword trailing at his side, leaving Pietro to tend to the dying architect. The duel had been brutal, decisive. Leonardo Borromeo died a few hours later, his architectural ambitions cut short by the very arrogance that defined him. His unfinished plans for the Pitti Palace were later taken over by other architects, including Vasari himself, who continued the work, albeit with his own modification. The event, though kept from public proclamation by the Medici, was chronicled in the private notes of the city's Guild of Master Builders, a silent testament to the deadly rivalries within Florence's glittering artistic scene, where genius often clashed with ego, and the ultimate arbiter was steel. Vasari's own writings, particularly his lives of the most excellent painters, sculptors, and architects, though avoiding direct mention of the duel, subtly alter his descriptions of Leonardo, focusing more on his technical flaws than his artistic brilliance, suggesting a lasting bitterness. Number 5. The Merchant's Reckoning. The year was 1494, a turbulent period for Florence. The Medici, exiled after the invasion of King Charles VIII of France, saw their power diminished, and the city entered a period of Republican fervor, greatly influenced by the fiery preacher Girolamo Savonarola. This vacuum of central authority sometimes allowed personal grievances to escalate into deadly confrontations with less immediate fear of ducal reprisal. Giovanni Rucellai, a wealthy merchant whose family had enjoyed considerable Medici patronage, found himself in a precarious position. His wealth was vast, derived from banking and silk trade, but his political influence had waned. His dispute was with a younger, ambitious merchant named Lorenzo Strozzi, whose family had shrewdly allied themselves with the new Republican government. Lorenzo was known for his sharp business practices, his quick wit, and a ruthless ambition that bordered on disrespect for older traditions and established families. The Rucellai and Strozzi families had been rivals for generations, but the shift in power had brought their animosity to a boiling point, particularly over a lucrative contract for supplying grain to the city. The grain contract, crucial for the city's stability and the merchants' coffers, was to be awarded through a public bidding process. Giovanni Rucellai had meticulously prepared his offer, relying on his family's long-standing connections and reputation for reliability. Lorenzo Strozzi, however, employed more aggressive tactics. He spread rumors throughout the city, insinuating that Giovanni had hoarded grain during a previous shortage, and that his current supply was of inferior quality, sourced from areas plagued by blight. These rumors, whispered in the markets and public squares, began to undermine Giovanni's bid. The rumors culminated in a direct confrontation at the Mercato Nuovo, the new market, where merchants gathered to conduct business. And Giovanni, having heard the whispers, approached Lorenzo directly, his face a mask of controlled fury. "Messer Strozzi," Giovanni stated, his voice low but firm, "your lies about my grain are a slander against my name and my family's honor. You seek to win this contract through deceit, not merit." Lorenzo, surrounded by his own retinue of young, ambitious merchants, scoffed. "Messer Rucellai," he retorted, his voice loud enough for others to hear, "it is not deceit, but simple truth. Your grain is as old and moldy as your family's declining influence in this city. Perhaps you should retire to your villa and leave the serious business to those with fresh ideas." The personal attack, the public humiliation, and the direct assault on his family's standing were unbearable. Giovanni, a man accustomed to respect, felt his blood boil. "You insult my family, Messer Strozzi," Giovanni spat, his hand instinctively going to the hilt of his concealed dagger. "You will answer for this." Lorenzo merely smiled, a cold, calculating grin. "Anytime, old man." The exchange was noted in the detailed ledgers of the Guild of Bankers, who recorded significant events impacting their members' reputations. Giovanni's second, his loyal and pragmatic foreman, Antonio, delivered the challenge to Lorenzo that very evening. The terms were unusual, reflecting Giovanni's desire for a public, symbolic redress of honor, a duel with long daggers, fought in the open square in front of the Palazzo della Signoria at noon 3 days hence. The choice of daggers, often used for close quarters fighting, indicated a brutal, intimate combat. Lorenzo, though surprised by the audacity of the occasion, accepted. He appointed a younger cousin, a hot-headed student named Piero, as his second. The challenge, delivered and accepted before a minor city official, was a testament to the diminished power of the government to prevent such public displays of private justice during this tumultuous period. The 3 days leading to the duel saw Florence abuzz with anticipation. Giovanni, though older, was a man of considerable strength and experience. He had traveled extensively in his youth, and he had learned to defend himself in various dangerous encounters. He practiced diligently with his dagger, focusing on quick defensive movements and precise thrusts to vital areas. He knew Lorenzo was younger and perhaps more agile, but he also knew that Lorenzo's experience in true combat was limited. Giovanni's training focused on drawing his opponent into his own reach, where his strength and experience would tell. Private correspondence from Giovanni to a family friend in Siena, detailing his solemn commitment to the duel, speaks of his unwavering determination. Lorenzo, though confident in his youth and quickness, was also aware of Giovanni's formidable reputation. He was not a fool. He practiced with a fencing master, focusing on speed and evasion, aiming to disarm or incapacitate Giovanni rather than engage in a direct test of strength. He planned to use his agility to circle Giovanni, looking for openings, striking quickly, and moving away. He believed that Giovanni, despite his strength, would tire quickly. The memoirs of Piero Strozzi, Lorenzo's second, later compiled for his family, describe Lorenzo's strategic approach to the duel. The day of the duel arrived, bright and clear, with the sun beating down on the Piazza della Signoria. A crowd had already begun to gather, despite the official discouragement of such public displays of violence. The Palazzo della Signoria, symbol of Florentine governance, loomed silently over the square. Giovanni Ruscelli arrived first, dressed in simple, dark clothing, his face grim but resolute. Antonio, his second, stood beside him, carrying a small satchel containing water and bandages. Soon after, Lorenzo Strozzi arrived, accompanied by Piero. Lorenzo wore a more fashionable tunic, his youthful confidence evident in his stride. He looked around at the growing crowd, a faint smirk playing on his lips. Piero, his second, looked nervous, his eyes darting between the crowd and the two combatants. The seconds, adhering to the ancient rituals, briefly conferred, confirming the terms of the duel and ensuring no hidden protections were worn. They marked the dueling ground, a small circle in the center of the piazza, in the full view of the assembled citizens. Giovanni and Lorenzo took their positions, facing each other. The daggers, short and deadly, glinted in the sunlight. The air was tense, the murmuring of the crowd hushed into a profound silence. No one spoke. This was a spectacle, but also a solemn act of justice, as defined by the men involved. Antonio gave the signal, a short nod of his head. The duel began. Lorenzo, true to his plan, moved first with a burst of youthful energy. He feinted left, then right, attempting to draw Giovanni's guard. He danced around Giovanni, thrusting his dagger quickly, aiming for the arms or legs, hoping to disarm or disable him without a lethal blow. Giovanni, however, remained rooted, his stance wide and firm. He used his dagger for parries, deflecting Lorenzo's swift thrusts with practiced ease. He kept his eyes fixed on Lorenzo's movements, waiting patiently, conserving his energy. Lorenzo grew increasingly frustrated by Giovanni's unyielding defense. His quick movements were not finding their mark, and Giovanni's steady, unmoving presence was unnerving. Lorenzo pressed his attack, trying to close the distance, to engage in a more direct struggle, believing his agility would still win. He lunged forward with a sharp thrust, aimed at Giovanni's chest, hoping to force him to retreat. Giovanni, however, did not retreat. He parried Lorenzo's thrust with a powerful block, sending Lorenzo's dagger scraping away. In the same fluid motion, Giovanni stepped forward, closing the distance rapidly. He was no longer just defending. He brought his dagger up in a swift, devastating upward thrust. The blade found its mark in Lorenzo's abdomen. Lorenzo cried out, a sharp, choked sound. His eyes widened in shock and pain. He stumbled back, his dagger falling from his grasp, his hands clutching his bleeding stomach. Giovanni immediately withdrew his blade, stepping back, his face grim. He stood over Lorenzo, his chest heaving, his dagger still in his hand, its tip now stained crimson. Antonio was instantly at his side, taking the dagger from him and wiping it clean with a cloth. Piero, Lorenzo's second, rushed to his cousin's side, calling his name, tears streaming down his face. And Lorenzo lay on the cobblestones, his breathing rag and a dark stain spreading across his tunic. The crowd murmured, some gasping, some nodding grimly. Giovanni had met the challenge. Lorenzo, though young and agile, had underestimated the older man's resilience and strength. Lorenzo Strozzi died moments later, his lifeblood seeping onto the ancient stones of the Piazza della Signoria. His death sent a ripple of shock through the younger merchant class, a stark reminder that cunning alone was not enough in the face of absolute honor. The city officials, though unable to prevent the duel, quickly dispersed the crowd and arranged for Lorenzo's body to be removed. Giovanni Russelli, his honor restored, returned to his business, his reputation as a formidable, unyielding figure solidified. The outcome of the duel indirectly influenced the grain contract, which was subsequently awarded to Giovanni Russelli, a detail noted in the ledgers of the Florentine Public Works Office, confirming the commercial implications of this bloody resolution. Number 4. The Artist and the Patron. The year was 1572. Florence, under Francesco I di Medici, continued its grand artistic traditions, but the patronage landscape was complex, often fraught with political maneuvering and personal rivalries. Vincenzo Bellini, a celebrated sculptor known for his dramatic, emotionally charged marble figures, found himself increasingly at odds with a powerful minor nobleman, Donato Salviati. And Donato was a connoisseur of the arts, but his patronage often came with controlling demands and a tendency to publicly criticize artists who did not conform precisely to his vision. Vincenzo had just completed a major commission for the Duke, a monumental statue of Perseus with the head of Medusa, intended for the Loggia dei Lanzi. The work was widely praised, a masterpiece of form and expression. Donato Salviati, however, had initially advocated for a different sculptor for the commission and harbored a particular resentment towards Vincenzo, perhaps stemming from a prior, smaller commission where Vincenzo had refused to alter a design to Donato's taste. Donato frequently voiced his disapproval of Vincenzo's perceived arrogance and his artistic liberties. The flashpoint occurred during a private viewing of the finished Perseus statue, attended by Duke Francesco and a select group of courtiers and patrons. Donato Salviati, standing prominently, began to critique the sculpture's details, not subtly, but with a loud, theatrical voice, ensuring everyone within earshot could hear his pronouncements. "Will the figure of Perseus is passable," Donato declared, waving his hand dismissively at the magnificent marble. "The Medusa's head lacks true horror. It is too beautiful, Maestro Bellini, for such a monstrous creature. It suggests a lack of understanding of the mythological narrative, or perhaps a deficiency in portraying true terror." He then added, a smirk playing on his lips. "Perhaps Maestro Bellini is more suited to carving pretty cherubs than depicting the darker aspects of legend." Vincenzo Bellini, a man known for his artistic passion and equally fiery temperament, felt his blood run cold. His life's work a piece he had poured his soul into for years, was being publicly ridiculed as aesthetically flawed and intellectually shallow by a man who had not even commissioned it. The insult to his artistic integrity and the direct attack on his understanding of the classical texts was unbearable. He stepped forward, his voice tight with suppressed fury. "Donato Salviati," Vincenzo stated, his words cutting through the murmuring admiration for the sculpture. "Your eye is as dull as your mind. You slander my work and, by extension, my honor. Such words, uttered in this sacred place of art, demand a different kind of judgment." Donato, surprised by the directness of the challenge, merely shrugged, a disdainful gesture. The Duke, though a patron of the arts, recognized the inevitability of the confrontation. The event was recorded in the private journal of Duchess Giovanna d'Austria, who found such displays of male honor both captivating and disturbing. Vincenzo II, a young, ambitious apprentice sculptor named Matteo, delivered the challenge to Donato that very evening. The terms were explicit: a duel with rapiers, a weapon favoring skill and finesse, to be fought at midnight, 2 nights hence, in the secluded courtyard of the Palazzo Pitti, a place known only to a select few courtiers and servants, thus ensuring maximum secrecy. Donato, who fancied himself a skilled swordsman, readily accepted. He appointed his chamberlain, a former military officer named Gregorio, as his second. The arrangement for a duel within the Duke's own residence, though unheard of for commoners, was a testament to Donato's influence and the duelist's determination to keep the affair utterly private. The 2 days that followed were a blur of intense preparation for Vincenzo. He was an artist, not a soldier, but he had received the customary fencing training of a Florentine gentleman. He practiced tirelessly with Matteo, who was a surprisingly capable fencer himself. Vincenzo focused on his footwork, on precision thrusts, and on conserving his energy, knowing that Donato was reputedly a powerful opponent. He knew this duel was not just for his life, but for the integrity of his artistic vision. His honor as a creator was on the line. The details of Vincenzo's rigorous training are recounted in the fragmented notes of Matteo's personal sketchbook, often found amidst his drawings. Donato Salviati, on the other hand, approached the duel with a mixture of overconfidence and a cool, calculating strategy. He knew Vincenzo was a passionate man, perhaps prone to rash actions. Donato intended to exploit this. He focused on maintaining a strong defense, then launching swift, decisive counterattacks. He believed his superior training and experience would quickly disarm the emotional artist. Donato's confidence is evident in letters to his relatives, where he boasted of his fencing prowess, though he did not mention the duel itself. The midnight hour arrived shrouded in absolute darkness, save for the faint glow of the moon filtering through the high archways of the Palazzo Pitti courtyard. The air was still, cold and heavy with the scent of damp stone. The courtyard, usually a bustling hub of ducal activity during the day, was now utterly silent, its vastness amplifying every small sound. Vincenzo Bellini arrived first, dressed in dark, simple clothing, his rapier gleaming faintly at his side. Matteo, his second, stood silently behind him, his face pale with apprehension. Shortly after, Donato Salviati arrived, accompanied by Gregorio. Donato wore a finely tailored dark velvet doublet, a testament to his continued vanity even in the face of death. He carried himself with an air of arrogant confidence. And Gregorio, his second, was a grizzled veteran, his eyes constantly scanning the shadows. The seconds, following the solemn protocol, exchanged brief, formal words, confirming the terms of the duel and ensuring that no hidden armor or weapons were present. They chose a relatively open area within the courtyard where the moonlight offered just enough illumination for the combat. Vincenzo and Donato took their positions, facing each other in the dim light. The rapiers, long and slender, were drawn, their tips almost invisible in the gloom. No words were exchanged, no last-minute challenges. This was a silent, deadly ballet, a final judgment on art and honor. Matteo gave the signal, a short, sharp clearing of his throat. The duel began. But Donato, true to his strategy, opened with a series of quick, aggressive feints, trying to draw Vincenzo into a hasty response. He moved with a practiced fluidity, his rapier flashing through the dim light. Vincenzo, however, remained disciplined. He parried each feint with a precise, economical movement, his blade meeting Donato's with soft, metallic whispers. He did not rush, but waited, observing Donato's patterns, his breathing steady. Donato pressed his advantage, launching a series of swift thrusts, aiming for Vincenzo's chest and arms. He relied on speed and surprise, attempting to overwhelm the sculptor. Vincenzo, however, was surprisingly agile. He used his artistic eye for precision, his parries deflecting Donato's blows with uncanny accuracy. He moved with a dancer's grace, retreating slightly, then moving forward, forcing Donato to adjust his footing, to extend himself. As the duel continued, Donato's frustration began to mount. He was accustomed to quickly dominating his opponents. Vincenzo's unyielding defense, his calm composure, unnerved him. Donato, in a fit of pique, attempted a more complex, flamboyant maneuver, a disengage followed by a circular thrust, a move that required perfect timing and balance. His execution, however, was rushed, driven by his growing impatience. His rapier swept wide, leaving him momentarily exposed. It was the opening Vincenzo had been waiting for. In a single, fluid motion, Vincenzo parried Donato's wild thrust with a strong, upward block, sending Donato's blade arcing into the empty air. Before Donato could recover his balance, or his guard, Vincenzo lunged forward. His rapier, moving with a speed that belied his profession, slipped past Donato's inadequate defense. The point found its mark, piercing Donato's chest directly over his heart. Donato cried out, a raw, strangled sound of shock and pain. His rapier clattered to the stone ground. He stumbled back, clutching his chest, his eyes wide in disbelief. Vincenzo immediately withdrew his blade, stepping back, his chest heaving, his face grim but resolute. Matteo was instantly at his side, taking the rapier from him. Gregorio, Donato's second, rushed to his master, calling his name, but it was too late. Donato Salviati collapsed onto the cold stones of the courtyard, his lifeblood seeping from the fatal wound. His eyes, fixed on the moonlight, grew dim. Gregorio, his face pale, slowly rose. He looked at Vincenzo, a silent acknowledgement of the duel's finality. There was no argument, no accusation. The duel had been fair, the outcome conclusive. Vincenzo, his honor avenged, simply nodded. He turned and walked slowly away with Matteo, disappearing into the shadows of the Palazzo Pitti, leaving Donato's body to be removed in the morning. The incident was meticulously covered up by the Medici court. No public record of the duel was made, but whispered accounts within the artistic community, preserved in the informal histories of art academies, confirmed Vincenzo Bellini's continued prominence and Donato Salviati's sudden, unexplained demise. The grand statue of Perseus remained, a silent, powerful testament to the sculptor's artistry and the deadly price of his vindicated honor. Number 3. The Scholar's Gambit. The year was 1590, and Ferdinand I of Medici, having returned to a lay life after his cardinalate, now ruled as Grand Duke of Tuscany. His reign was marked by a renewed emphasis on trade, infrastructure, and intellectual pursuits, drawing scholars and thinkers from across Europe to Florence. Among these intellectuals was Dr. Cesare Albani, a renowned humanist scholar from Bologna, invited to the Medici court for his expertise in ancient Greek texts. Cesare was a man of immense intellect, but also possessed a sharp tongue and a disdain for what he perceived as intellectual laziness. His adversary was Professor Emilio Conti, a Florentine academic of old standing, whose family had deep roots in the city's university. And Emilio was a traditionalist, cautious and meticulous in his scholarship, but also fiercely protective of his established reputation and his family's long-held influence within Florentine academic circles. He viewed Cesare's dynamic, sometimes unorthodox, interpretations of classical texts as a threat to scholarly order. Their rivalry was confined to academic debates and public lectures, but the tension was palpable. The catalyst for their duel occurred during a highly anticipated public disputation at the University of Florence, attended by numerous students, scholars, and members of the Medici court. The debate centered on the correct interpretation of a particularly obscure passage from Aristotle. Professor Conti presented his carefully reasoned, traditional interpretation, relying on centuries of commentary. When it was Dr. Albani's turn to respond, he dismantled Conti's argument with brutal precision, citing newly discovered manuscripts and offering a radically different, yet compelling interpretation. Then he delivered the personal blow. "Professor Conti," Cesare declared, his voice ringing with intellectual disdain, "your argument, though diligently prepared, is as ancient and brittle as the parchments you cling to. It is the work of a scribe, not a scholar, a regurgitation of old mistakes, rather than a pursuit of new truth. One would imagine such a mind capable of nothing more than copying existing errors." The implication was clear. Conti was not a true intellectual, but a mere copier, devoid of original thought. A gasp rippled through the assembled scholars. To question a scholar's originality, his very capacity for independent thought, was a profound insult, especially in a time where intellect was highly valued. But Professor Conti, a man who prided himself on his meticulous scholarship, turned deathly pale. His hands trembled, clutching the podium. "Dr. Albani," Emilio managed to stammer, his voice hoarse with suppressed fury. "You have stepped beyond academic discourse. You have questioned my intellect, my honor, and my family's name. This insult cannot be resolved with words." He then challenged Cesare directly, his voice gaining strength. The dispute was abruptly ended, and the audience dispersed, buzzing with the implications of the challenge. This dramatic exchange is documented in the detailed records of the University of Florence's official proceedings, which briefly mention the unforeseen cessation of the debate due to personal disagreements. That same evening, Emilio's second, a serious-minded law student named Filippo, delivered the challenge to Cesare Albani. The terms were unusual: a duel with long rapiers, a weapon that demanded both reach and precision, to be fought at sunrise, 2 days hence, on the isolated banks of the Arno River, upstream from the city, to ensure utmost secrecy. The choice of long rapiers suggested a duel of skill and endurance, rather than brute force. Cesare, though a scholar, was well versed in the gentleman's code of honor and had received fencing instruction as a youth. He accepted, appointing his personal secretary, a quiet, observant man named Giulio, as his second. The challenge, while discreet, was known within the upper echelons of the University and Medici court, as implied in the private correspondence of Grand Duke Ferdinand's personal physician, Dr. Orazio. The 2 days that followed were a testament to the contrasting natures of the two scholars. Cesare Albani, despite his academic focus, approached the duel with a fierce intellectual curiosity. He meticulously studied fencing manuals, analyzing different stances and thrusts as if they were complex theorems. He practiced with Giulio, focusing on speed, precision, and exploiting his opponent's potential weaknesses. Cesare was less powerful than some, but his mind was exceptionally quick, and he aimed to outthink his opponent. He sought to anticipate Emilio's moves, to counter them with elegant, efficient thrusts. Fragments of Cesare's private notes, found amongst his scholarly papers, reveal his methodical approach to the art of fencing. Emilio Conti, on the other hand, approached the duel with a grim determination. He was older, more set in his ways, and his physical prowess was not what it once was. He sought out a retired fencing master, a former captain of the guard, to refresh his skills. Emilio focused on traditional parries, on a solid defensive posture, and on capitalizing on any aggressive moves from Cesare. He believed Cesare's intellectual arrogance might lead to overconfidence in a physical confrontation. Emilio practiced with a steady, unwavering resolve, determined to defend his and his family's honor. Records from the Fencing Academy of Maestro Leone, mentioning an unusual late-career student, indirectly refer to Emilio's diligent practice. The dawn of the appointed day broke with a cold, damp mist clinging to the banks of the Arno. The river flowed silently, its waters reflecting the pale light of the sky. The chosen spot was a narrow, grassy strip of land, bordered by the river on one side and a thicket of reeds on the other, ensuring that no unwanted observers could witness the event. Cesare Albani arrived first, dressed in practical dark clothing, his long rapier gleaming faintly at his side. Giulio, his second, stood silently beside him, his face etched with concern. Cesare looked composed, his scholarly demeanor masking a keen readiness for combat. Shortly after, Emilio Conti arrived, accompanied by Filippo. Emilio wore a similar practical attire, his face pale but resolute. Filippo, his second, was a serious, almost somber young man. The seconds, adhering to the solemn rituals, exchanged brief, formal words, confirming the terms of the duel and ensuring no hidden protections were present. They marked the dueling ground, a small, circumscribed area within the narrow strip of land, ensuring a confined combat. Cesare and Emilio took their positions, facing each other across the distance. The long rapiers, formidable and elegant, were drawn, their tips almost invisible in the mist. The only sound was the gentle lapping of the river against the bank. No words were exchanged. This was a silent, intellectual battle made physical, a desperate gamble for reputation. Filippo gave the signal, a quiet clearing of his throat. The duel began. Emilio, though older, lunged first with the traditional direct thrust, aiming for Cesare's chest. He relied on the tried-and-true methods he had practiced. Cesare, however, was prepared. He parried the thrust with an unexpected, almost counter-intuitive deflection, forcing Emilio's blade wide. He then quickly retreated, maintaining his distance, forcing Emilio to advance, to extend himself. Cesare moved with a surprising agility, his movements precise and economical. Emilio pressed his attack, his long rapier flashing, aiming for Cesare's arms and legs, attempting to gain an advantage through sheer persistence. He was strong, but his movements were becoming predictable. Cesare, however, continued to parry, to deflect, to move. He analyzed Emilio's patterns, searching for an opening, a moment of imbalance, or an exposed flank. He danced around Emilio, forcing him to turn, to pivot, to expend his energy. As the duel continued, Emilio's breathing grew ragged, his movements less precise. He was growing tired, and his frustration was evident in his increasingly desperate attacks. Cesare, though not outwardly fatigued, was calculating, waiting for the perfect moment. And Emilio, in a moment of exasperation, attempted a powerful sweeping attack, a risky move with a long rapier, hoping to force Cesare onto the defensive. His stance was briefly compromised, his balance unsteady. It was the opening Cesare had anticipated. In a lightning-fast, almost imperceptible motion, Cesare parried Emilio's sweeping blow with a swift downward block, sending Emilio's blade scraping against the ground. Before Emilio could recover his guard, Cesare lunged forward. His rapier, moving with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel, slipped past Emilio's guard, finding its mark in Emilio's right thigh, just above the knee. As Emilio cried out, a sharp, involuntary sound of pain and surprise. His rapier clattered to the damp earth. He stumbled back, clutching his bleeding thigh, his face contorted in agony. Cesare immediately withdrew his blade, stepping back, his chest heaving, his face grim but resolute. Giulia was instantly at his side, taking the rapier from him. Filippo, Emilio's second, rushed to his master, calling his name, tears welling in his eyes. And Emilio lay on the wet grass, his breathing ragged, a dark stain spreading across his breeches. The wound, though not immediately fatal, was deep and severely debilitating. Filippo looked up at Cesare, his face a mixture of despair and a grim acceptance. "He lives, Dr. Albani," he stammered, "but he is gravely wounded. His fencing days are over." Cesare, his voice hoarse, simply nodded. "Take him. The honor has been met." He turned and walked slowly away with Giulio, disappearing into the mist along the riverbank, leaving Filippo to tend to the injured scholar. And Emilio Conti survived, but his leg was permanently crippled, ending his public lectures and his ability to stand for long periods, severely curtailing his academic presence. Cesare Albani continued his work at the Medici court, his reputation as a brilliant scholar now underscored by an unexpected and deadly proficiency with the blade. The event, though officially suppressed, circulated as a cautionary tale among Florentine academics, a reminder that even intellectual disputes could spill over into fatal challenges to honor. The university archives contain subtle shifts in the documentation of scholarly debates, often referencing the need for civility and restraint in the years following this incident, a quiet acknowledgement of the duel's impact. Number 2. The Spy's Reckoning. The year was 1609, and Cosimo II de' Medici, young and eager to assert his authority, ruled a Tuscany increasingly integrated into the complex web of European politics. This era saw the rise of intricate espionage networks, as states sought to gain advantage through intelligence and counterintelligence. Captain Matteo Morelli, a skilled and taciturn intelligence officer in Cosimo's service, was tasked with uncovering foreign plots within Florence. He was known for his discretion, his sharp mind, and his unwavering loyalty to the Medici. His nemesis was a flamboyant, audacious Venetian agent known only as Il Volpe, the Fox, whose true name was believed to be Giovanni Falier. Il Volpe had infiltrated Florentine society with ease, charming his way into noble circles and gathering valuable intelligence for the Venetian Republic. He was known for his quick wit, his mastery of disguise, and a penchant for leaving subtle, taunting clues for his adversaries. Matteo and Il Volpe had been playing a deadly game of cat and mouse across Florence for months, each trying to outmaneuver the other. The final insult occurred during a tense diplomatic meeting between Florentine and Venetian envoys, ostensibly about trade agreements, but with underlying currents of suspicion. Matteo Morelli had intercepted a coded message from Il Volpe revealing his presence within the very palazzo where the meeting was taking place, and subtly hinting at Florentine weaknesses to the Venetian delegation. Matteo, unable to expose Il Volpe without compromising his own sources, found himself at a disadvantage. During a brief recess, as delegates mingled, Il Volpe, in a cleverly disguised persona, approached Matteo. With a knowing smile, he whispered, "Captain Morelli, your net, it seems, has a tear. Your vigilance, much like Florentine wine, lacks a certain strength." He then suddenly slipped a small, intricately folded paper into Matteo's hand. Unfolding it later, Matteo found a crude drawing of a fox laughing at a tangled net, a clear personal taunt confirming Il Volpe's presence and mocking Matteo's inability to capture him. The insult was public, albeit subtle, a direct challenge to Matteo's professional competence and his honor as a state operative. Matteo, his jaw tight with anger, knew he could not allow this to stand. The honor of his service, and by extension the security of the Medici, was at stake. He could not expose Il Volpe politically without repercussions. He would have to resolve it personally. Matteo's second, a grizzled veteran of the Medici Guard named Franco, delivered the challenge to Il Volpe through a trusted intermediary. The terms were explicit: a duel with military sabers, chosen for their cutting power and their association with soldiers, to be fought at midnight, 2 nights hence, in the secluded ruins of an old hunting lodge deep within the Medici grounds, far from any prying eyes. The choice of sabers signaled a brutal, decisive encounter. Il Volpe, audacious as ever, accepted, appointing a former mercenary, a shadowy figure known only as Silas's, as his second. The arrangement was made through a network of spies and informants, ensuring its utter secrecy, as recorded in a fragmented and deliberately vague entry within the Medici state archives concerning unforeseen security measures. The 2 days that followed were a silent testament to the deadly game between the two men. Matteo Morelli, though a strategist, was also a formidable combatant. He had been trained in all forms of armed combat since his youth. He practiced relentlessly with Franco, focusing on powerful cuts and swift parries, honing his skill with the saber. He knew Il Volpe was elusive, but he also knew that in a direct physical confrontation, cunning alone would not save him. Matteo aimed for a decisive, overwhelming victory. His personal letters to a former superior, written in code and later deciphered by historians, speak of his absolute determination to end the threat posed by Il Volpe. Il Volpe, while primarily an intelligence operative, was also a master of self-preservation and combat. He was quick, agile, and resourceful. He trained with Silas, focusing on evasion, on drawing his opponent in, and on exploiting any moment of hesitation or overextension. He believed his speed and unpredictability would give him an advantage over Matteo's more direct military style. He planned to tire Matteo, then strike decisively. His movements were fluid, almost dance-like, designed to confound and frustrate. The fragmented reports of Silas, found in a hidden compartment in a Venetian diplomatic pouch, subtly describe Il Volpe's unconventional training methods. The midnight hour arrived, shrouded in absolute darkness, pierced only by the faint gleam of stars through the broken roof of the ruined hunting lodge. The air was cold, still, and heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying stone. The ruins, long abandoned, amplified every rustle of leaves, every distant hoot of an owl. Matteo Morelli arrived first, dressed in dark, practical clothing, his military saber gleaming ominously at his side. Franco, his second, stood silently behind him, his face a grim mask. Matteo looked resolute, his eyes scanning the shadows. Shortly after, Il Volpe arrived, accompanied by Silas. Il Volpe wore a close-fitting, dark outfit designed for stealth and movement. He carried himself with an air of arrogant nonchalance, his saber reflecting the faint starlight. Silas, his second, was a silent, imposing figure, his face hidden in shadow. The seconds, adhering to the grim rituals, exchanged brief, formal words, confirming the terms of the duel and ensuring no hidden protections were present. They chose a relatively open area within the ruined lodge, where the collapsed walls offered a macabre arena for the combat. Matteo and Il Volpe took their positions, facing each other in the gloom. The military sabers, heavy and curved, were drawn, their edges glinting faintly. The only sound was the distant chirping of crickets. No words were exchanged. This was a final, deadly reckoning between two masters of a hidden war. Franco gave the signal, a short, guttural grunt. The duel began. Il Volpe, true to his style, opened with a series of quick, elusive movements. He danced around Matteo, feinting, drawing Matteo's attention, attempting to create an opening through confusion. His saber flashed, aiming for Matteo's arms and legs, seeking to disable rather than kill immediately. Matteo, however, was prepared for this. He met each feint with a steady, unyielding defense, his saber meeting Il Volpe's with sharp, metallic clangs. He did not rush, but kept his ground, forcing Il Volpe to come to him, to expose himself. Matteo then began his own offensive. He moved with a powerful, direct attack, swinging his saber in wide, devastating arcs, aiming for Il Volpe's head and chest. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of steel and brute strength. Il Volpe, however, was incredibly agile. He parried each blow with a swift deflection, ducking and weaving, avoiding Matteo's more powerful strikes. He used the confined space to his advantage, forcing Matteo to adjust his footing, to turn, to expose small openings. As the duel continued, the sounds of clashing steel filled the silent ruins, echoing eerily. Il Volpe, though swift, began to tire, his evasive maneuvers costing him energy. Matteo, though direct, was also becoming more cautious, wary of Il Volpe's unpredictable movements. Il Volpe, in a moment of desperation, attempted a risky maneuver, a low sweep designed to trip Matteo. He misjudged the uneven ground, his foot snagging on a loose stone. He stumbled, his balance momentarily compromised, his saber momentarily slipping. It was the opening Matteo had waited for. In a single, fluid motion, Matteo brought his saber down in a powerful, precise cut. The heavy blade sliced through the air, finding its mark across Il Volpe's left side, just above his hip. Il Volpe cried out, a sharp, choked sound of pain and surprise. His saber clattered to the ground, its heavy weight dragging him down. He stumbled back, clutching his side, his face contorted in agony. Matteo immediately withdrew his saber, stepping back, his chest heaving, his face grim but resolute. Franco was instantly at his side, taking the saber from him. Silas, Il Volpe's second, rushed to his master, calling his name, but it was too late. Il Volpe collapsed onto the cold, damp earth of the ruins, his lifeblood seeping from the fatal wound. His eyes, fixed on the broken roof of the lodge, grew dim. Silas, his face unreadable in the gloom, slowly rose. He looked at Matteo, a silent acknowledgement of the duel's finality. There was no argument, no accusation. The duel had been fair, the outcome conclusive. Matteo, his honor avenged, simply nodded. He turned and walked slowly away with Franco, disappearing into the darkness of the Medici grounds, leaving Silas to tend to the dying spy. Il Volpe's death was officially attributed to a sudden illness in Florentine circles and to a disappearance in Venetian reports. Captain Matteo Morelli continued his work, his reputation as a ruthless and effective intelligence officer solidified. The specific details of this duel, though never publicly acknowledged, became a whispered legend among intelligence networks across Europe, a chilling example of how personal honor and state security could tragically intertwine, as hinted at in the sparse records of the Florentine Secret Council. Number 1. The Cardinal's Fury. The year was 1630. Florence, under the young Grand Duke Ferdinando II de' Medici, was grappling with the devastating plague that swept through Europe. But even in the shadow of widespread death, the intricate web of court politics and personal honor continued to dictate behavior. Cardinal Roberto di Montelupo, a powerful and influential figure within the Roman Curia and a close advisor to the Medici, was known for his sharp intellect, his unwavering devotion to the church, and his fierce protection of his family's ancient name. His adversary was the Marquis Giulio Tornabuoni, a prominent Florentine nobleman with a reputation for arrogance and a certain disregard for ecclesiastical authority. The Tornabuoni family, though influential, had a history of friction with the Montelupo family, stemming from centuries-old land disputes and political allegiances. Giulio, in particular, chafed under the cardinal's moral authority and believed the church held too much sway over temporal affairs. The insult that ignited their duel occurred during a tense meeting of the Florentine Senate, convened to discuss measures against the encroaching plague. Cardinal Montelupo had proposed a strict quarantine supported by ecclesiastical decree, arguing for the moral imperative of protecting the populace. Marquis Tornabuoni, advocating for economic considerations, loudly opposed the quarantine, and then, in a moment of reckless abandon, made a deeply personal and sacrilegious jibe. Cardinal Montelupo, Giulio declared, his voice ringing with contempt, "Your decrees are as hollow as your prayers for the sick. Perhaps if your family had not stolen our lands generations ago, you would have a truer understanding of earthly suffering, rather than hiding behind the skirts of your false piety." The accusation of ancestral theft, combined with the attack on his spiritual integrity and his family's honor, was a profound and unforgivable transgression. A stunned silence fell over the Senate chamber. To publicly accuse a cardinal of theft and question his piety, especially from a family as powerful as the Montelupos, was an act of extreme provocation. Cardinal Montelupo, his face drained of color, his hands clenching his crucifix, stood rigidly. Despite his ecclesiastical robes, the fire of his noble lineage burned in his eyes. "Marquis Tornabuoni," Roberto stated, his voice low and vibrating with cold fury, "you have uttered words that no man of God, nor any man of honor, can endure. You will answer for this blasphemy and slander, not in this chamber, but where true justice is found." He then challenged Giulio directly, casting aside all ecclesiastical propriety. The Senate meeting dissolved into chaos, the gravity of the challenge immediately understood. The incident, unusual given the cardinal's high office, was noted in the detailed, though discreet, minutes of the Florentine Senate's extraordinary session. That very evening, Cardinal Montelupo, having swiftly divested himself of his cardinal's robes and donned the simple attire of a nobleman, had his loyal steward Niccolo deliver the challenge to Marquis Tornabuoni. The terms were grim and utterly binding: a duel to the death with long swords, chosen for their brutal finality, to be fought at sunrise 3 days hence, in the secluded and desolate plains of the Maremma, far from any habitation, ensuring that only the combatants and their seconds would witness the finality of the confrontation. The distance in weapon choice spoke of a duel meant to settle centuries of animosity with utter, unsparing force. Giulio, though initially taken aback by the cardinal's ferocity, accepted, appointing a distant, hardened relative, Count Fabrizio, as his second. The challenge and its unique terms were known only to a handful of influential families whose private correspondence and ledgers of the era attest to the unprecedented nature of a cardinal's duel. The 3 days leading to the duel were a period of grim preparation for Cardinal Montelupo. Despite his ecclesiastical office, Roberto had been trained in military arts from a young age, as befitted a son of a powerful noble house. He was still a man of considerable strength and formidable skill with the sword, though he had not wielded one in earnest for decades. He practiced relentlessly with Niccolo, a former soldier, focusing on powerful, decisive attacks and unflinching defense. He knew this duel was not just for his honor, but for the sacred trust placed upon him. He approached it with a chilling determination, a fusion of righteous fury and noble pride. His personal prayer book, later found amongst his private effects, contained stark notations concerning just retribution and the cleansing of slander. Marquis Tornabuoni, though equally skilled and younger, harbored a sense of unease. He had not anticipated such a drastic response from a cardinal. He practiced with Count Fabrizio, honing his aggressive longsword techniques. He intended to leverage his youth and agility against the older man, planning to wear him down before delivering a fatal blow. And Giulio was known for his flamboyant style, but also for his ruthlessness in combat. He believed he could win, but the specter of facing a man of God, stripped of his holy vestments, was unsettling. The fragmented journal of Count Fabrizio mentions Giulio's increasing tension in his attempts to prepare for the cardinal's formidable presence. The dawn of the appointed day broke with a cold, unforgiving light over the desolate plains of the Maremma. The vast, flat landscape stretched to the horizon, unbroken save for a few sparse trees and the distant shimmer of a marsh. The chosen spot was utterly isolated, ensuring no accidental witnesses. Cardinal Montelupo, stripped of his clerical robes and dressed in simple, dark fencing attire, stood rigidly, his longsword gleaming in the pale light. Niccolo, his second, stood silently beside him, his face grim. The cardinal's expression was one of absolute, unyielding resolve. Shortly after, Marquis Tornabuoni arrived, accompanied by Count Fabrizio. And Giulio wore similarly practical attire, his face pale but determined. Fabrizio, his second, was a silent, imposing figure, his eyes constantly scanning the empty horizon. The seconds, adhering to the ancient, bloody rituals, exchanged brief, formal words confirming the terms of the duel to the death and ensuring no hidden protections were worn. They marked the dueling ground, a wide, open circle in the sparse grass, offering no cover, just the stark reality of combat. Cardinal Montelupo and Marquis Tornabuoni took their positions, facing each other across the 20 paces. The long swords, heavy and formidable, were drawn, their tips almost invisible against the vastness of the plains. The air was still, cold, and utterly silent, save for the whisper of the wind. No words were exchanged, no last-minute appeals. This was a duel beyond mere honor. It was a clash of ancient families, of secular pride against sacred authority. Niccolo gave the signal, a quiet clearing of his throat. The duel began. Marquis Tornabuoni, true to his aggressive style, launched an immediate, powerful attack. His longsword flashed, aiming for the cardinal's head, then his chest, a whirlwind of steel. He pressed his advantage, hoping to overwhelm the older man with speed and ferocity. Cardinal Montelupo, however, was prepared. He parried each blow with a deliberate, unflinching movement, his blade meeting Giulio's with powerful, resounding clangs. He held his ground, his stance solid, his eyes fixed on Giulio's. He moved with a surprising strength, deflecting Giulio's powerful strikes, with a resolve born of years of quiet contemplation and inherent martial skill. Giulio's initial fury began to subside, replaced by a growing frustration. His powerful attacks were being met with an unyielding defense, and the cardinal's silent, formidable presence was unsettling. Giulio attempted a series of more complex feints and disengages, trying to find an opening to break through the Cardinal's guard. Cardinal Montelupo, however, remained disciplined, his parries precise, his movements economical. He did not waste energy, waiting for the opportune moment, his long sword moving with the precision of a seasoned warrior. As the duel continued, Giulio's breathing grew ragged, his movements less precise. He was growing tired, and his frustration was evident in his increasingly desperate attacks. Cardinal Montelupo, though not young, seemed to possess an unexpected wellspring of stamina and purpose. Giulio, in a moment of exasperation, made a critical error. He overextended on a powerful thrust, leaving his body momentarily exposed, his guard wide open. It was the opening Cardinal Montelupo had waited for. In a single, fluid, and devastating motion, the Cardinal parried Giulio's wild thrust with a strong upward block, sending Giulio's blade wide. Before Giulio could recover his balance or his guard, Cardinal Montelupo lunged forward. His longsword, moving with a chilling precision, found its mark, piercing Giulio's heart. Giulio cried out, a raw, strangled sound of shock and pain. His longsword clattered to the desolate ground. He stumbled back, his hands clutching his chest, his face contorted in agony. Cardinal Montelupo immediately withdrew his blade, stepping back, his chest heaving, his face grim but resolute. And Niccolo was instantly at his side, taking the longsword from him. Count Fabrizio Giulio's second rushed to his master, calling his name, but it was too late. Marquis Giulio Tornabuoni collapsed onto the cold, unforgiving earth of the Maremma, his lifeblood seeping from the fatal wound. His eyes, fixed on the vast, empty sky, grew dim. And Count Fabrizio, his face pale with a mixture of despair and grim acceptance, slowly rose. He looked at Cardinal Montelupo, a silent acknowledgement of the duel's absolute finality. There was no argument, no accusation. The duel had been fair, the outcome conclusive. Cardinal Montelupo, his honor avenged, simply nodded. He turned and walked slowly away with Niccolo, disappearing into the vast emptiness of the plains, leaving Fabrizio to tend to the dead Marquis. Marquis Tornabuoni's death was officially attributed to a hunting accident by the Florentine authorities, a convenient fabrication given the plague's widespread devastation. Cardinal Roberto de Montelupo, having cleansed his family's honor and defended his sacred office, returned to his ecclesiastical duties, his reputation as a man of unwavering principle and formidable resolve solidified. The unspoken truth of this duel, however, passed into legend among the noble families of Florence, a stark and chilling reminder that even the highest spiritual office could not suppress the ancient, bloody call of honor and vengeance.